Let's jump right in. Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking an absolute masterclass in patience, strategy, and seizing power. We're looking at a political thriller spanning 2 entire centuries. Imagine watching an empire completely change hands, not through some sudden, fiery conquest, but through slow, methodical, ruthless ambition. Grab your notebooks, because we're heading back to medieval Europe to watch it all unfold.
It's an incredible puzzle, right? How exactly did Charlemagne's heirs lose the greatest empire in Europe to a family of humble civil servants? The mighty Carolingian Dynasty didn't just vanish overnight. Instead, they were slowly, strategically eclipsed by a mobile aristocratic family called the Robertians, who you probably know better as the legendary Capetians. To figure out how they pulled off this unprecedented dynastic coup, we really have to look at the crumbling foundation they built their house upon.
Section 1. The Empire Fragments. Let's look at the Carolingian collapse.
After the death of Charlemagne's son, Emperor Louis the Pious, things got messy fast. The empire descended into a bitter civil war among his heirs. To really grasp what was lost here, we have to contrast how things used to be with what they became. Under Charlemagne, royal authority was highly centralized. The emperor appointed officials to enforce his laws across massive territories. But the late Carolingian period, total fractured reality. Thanks to civil wars and relentless external pressures, those old centralized systems for raising troops and administering justice literally collapsed. Control of distant regions had to be handed over to local, self-interested elites.
This whole collapse was formalized by the 843 Treaty of Verdun. It physically divided the empire among 3 of Louis' surviving sons. Louis the German got the east, Lothar took the middle, and Charles the Bald took the west. But here's the thing about physically dividing an empire. You're permanently dividing its land, its wealth, and its central authority. Over time, further partitions carved the map into as many as 6 different Carolingian kingdoms, all ruled by competing branches of the exact same family.
So picture this. The Carolingian kings are weakened, and they're facing relentless, brutal raids from Vikings, Slavs, and Magyars. To simply survive, and to buy the loyalty of powerful nobles, the kings started giving away the farm, literally. They handed over their most valuable permanent assets, royal lands, highly profitable abbeys, entire counties. It was a desperate move. They essentially bought short-term military support by sacrificing their long-term power. The crown stayed symbolically important, but practically speaking, they were completely broke.
Section 2. Rise of the Robertians. A new power emerges. As the Carolingians lost their grip, opportunistic aristocratic families started moving around, searching for the best deals in these emerging kingdoms. Enter the Robertians. They were a mobile aristocratic family, originally from East Francia, and the direct ancestors of the Capetians. Now, the incredible irony here is that their first really prominent figure, Robert the Strong, didn't show up around 852 as a rebel. Not at all. He was a fiercely loyal pillar of defense for the West Frankish crown. He gained his immense influence not by usurping power, but by providing incredibly capable, loyal military service against the Viking invaders.
And their multi-generational playbook? Honestly, it's a masterclass in building an empire from scratch. Step 1, enthusiastically defend the realm against Vikings to prove you're absolutely necessary to the king. Step 2, collect your rewards. They scooped up military commands and highly profitable lay abbacies, which basically gave them control over massive church wealth. Step 3, and this is absolutely crucial, make sure those titles become hereditary, so they stay in your family forever instead of reverting back to the crown. And finally, step 4, marry into rival powerful families to cement your untouchable status. This playbook worked like an absolute charm. Robert the Strong's son, Odo, catapulted the family to superstardom by valiantly defending Paris during the massive Viking siege of 885. Odo held the city against impossible odds. And the real kicker, when the Carolingian emperor Charles the Fat finally showed up with a relief army in 886, he didn't even fight. He literally just paid the Vikings tribute to leave. So Odo looked like an absolute hero, while the emperor looked weak and completely ineffective.
Section 3. The power seesaw. The crown bounces back.
We now enter this wild, chaotic century where the crown awkwardly bounces back and forth. Just look at how pragmatism ruled this era. In 888, after Charles the Fat is deposed, our hero, Odo, is actually elected king of West Francia. He's the very first non-Carolingian to ever sit on that throne. But his power was pretty limited. So by 898, a compromise is reached and the Carolingian Charles the Simple takes over. Odo's brother Robert uses this moment to quietly secure the right to pass his family's vast offices down to his own son. Tensions eventually flare up again, and in 923, Robert is crowned anti-king in a rebellion, but after he dies in battle, the family does something fascinating. They shift tactics. By 936, instead of taking the throne themselves, they actually invite the Carolingian Louis IV back to rule.
Now, why on earth would they hand the crown back? Well, it comes down to the brilliant strategy of Robert's son, Hugh the Great. Hugh figured out that holding vast personal wealth and territory was way more secure than wearing a weak, impoverished crown that just puts a giant target on your back. So he flat out refused the crown. Instead, he focused on expanding his own holdings in Neustria, building solid alliances with a powerful Ottonian empire in the east, and manipulating those weak Carolingian kings from the shadows. He essentially became the ultimate puppet master.
Section 4. The Ottonian Threat. External pressures mount. While the Robertians were quietly leveling up internally, a massive external threat started squeezing the realm. In a desperate bid to show he still had teeth, the Carolingian king Lothar actually managed to occupy the old capital of Aachen in 978 and plundered it for 5 days. And get this wonderfully petty historical detail. Lothar took Charlemagne's famous golden eagle statue from the palace and turned it to face east. It was a deliberate, totally symbolic middle finger to the Ottonian Emperor Otto II. But, as you might guess, symbolic insults don't win wars against vastly superior empires. The Ottonians struck back hard, exposing just how fragile Lothar really was. Desperate to secure his dynasty against both the Ottonians and the rising Robertians, Lothar started making some truly baffling decisions. Look at this match. In 980, Lothar married his 15-year-old son, Louis, to Adelheid of Anjou, a woman in her 40s. He didn't even consult the Robertians. He just wanted to grab her massive landholdings to pincer his rivals. Unsurprisingly, this awkward political marriage was a total disaster, and Adelheid dumped her teenage husband just 2 years later. While Lothar was floundering, Hugh the Great's eldest son, Hugo Capet, was playing 4D chess. When Emperor Otto II invaded West Francia, Hugo led a relief army that attacked the Ottonian rearguard, totally solidifying his fame as a military hero. But then, and this is brilliant, completely outmaneuvering his own king, Hugo turned right around and actively improved his relations with those exact same Ottonians. He backed their leadership during their own succession crises, positioning himself as a reliable, heavy-hitting ally, while King Lothar just isolated himself further.
Section 5. The Capetian Coronation. A new dynasty takes the stage.
Decades of patient accumulation were about to finally pay off, triggered by a sudden tragedy. The very last Carolingian king, Louis V, died abruptly in a hunting accident in 987. But right before he died, he had set up an assembly at Compiègne to try Archbishop Adalbero of Reims for high treason, basically because the archbishop was a loyal supporter of Ottonian and therefore Robertian interests. So what does Hugo Capet do? He just casually shows up at the assembly with a massive, heavily armed host of soldiers. The trial is instantly dissolved. Hugo laid the real power structure of West Francia completely bare for everyone to see. He had the swords. The king did not. When King Louis V died shortly after, there was literally only one Carolingian claimant left, Charles of Lorraine. But Archbishop Adalbero, the guy whose life Hugo had just saved, convened a meeting in Senlis. Adalbero stood up and absolutely destroyed the final Carolingian claimant publicly, delivering this scathing line. He called Charles a troublemaker, without honor, faith, or character. He pointed out that Charles had alienated everyone, the nobility, the clergy, the Ottonians. Adalbero then told the assembly that if they wanted prosperity, there was only one choice. They had to crown the illustrious Duke of the Franks, Hugo Capet. And that brings us to the ultimate turning point. July 3rd, 987, Hugo Capet knelt in the cathedral of Reims and was anointed with holy oil. Because no major faction stood against him, the crown was his. With that single ceremony, the reign of Charlemagne's descendants in West Francia permanently came to an end. From those patient, calculated beginnings, Hugo laid the absolute foundation for the Capetian dynasty, a family that would go on to shape the destiny of France and rule all the way until the 19th century. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. Are the most successful conquerors the ones who arrive with a massive invading army, or the ones who patiently serve, quietly acquiring influence generation after generation, until there is simply no one left to give them orders? The Capetian ascent proves that sometimes the most revolutionary act you can make is just playing the long game better than anyone else. Thanks for joining me today, and keep questioning how the structures of our history were truly built.